You guys look pretty good after eating so much on Thursday, I want to say. None of you have passed out from sleep yet in your chairs. I think Thanksgiving for me personally is one of my favorite of all holidays. I mean, you just can't beat the idea of expressing thankfulness and gratitude to like your family and others around you. It just, we had a great time celebrating. My oldest daughter's in-laws are in from Ohio. The rest of the weekend didn't go well for them, but and I couldn't wait to send the text. That's the meanness in me instead of the graciousness in me. But it was just so much fun to be able to do that, to be able to share that sense of gratitude, and it just grows within us. You know, the English language is an ever-changing language. You ever notice that? I mean, for instance, if you're a sports person, for instance, and pre-2000, you know, the 21st century, whenever you said the word goat, it means quite a bit different than it does today. In those days, if you said a goat, it means that you've made some kind of spectacular major fail, like for putting your hand up for a fair catch and then muffing that on the 5-yard line. You know, that's a major fail. That's a goat move in that situation. If you don't understand that, you didn't see Bedlam. Then, or like when I was growing up in baseball, if you were coming up to bat, you know, it's the 9th inning, bases are loaded, you're tied up, and there's a 3-2 count on you. If you strike out, you were called the GOAT. There was a major fail in that situation. And now if you're the pitcher and you struck out that person, then you were the hero in that situation. So that's what GOAT meant to me for a long time. And then now all of a sudden, when we're talking about GOAT, it means something totally different. It means greatest of all time. You know, so whenever they say, like Michael Jordan is the GOAT of the NBA, that he is the greatest of all time, we all applaud. Or whenever they say that Nick Saban, who after winning 7 college NCAA championship, is the NCAA football coach GOAT, we just get depressed over those sorts of things, but we understand that, you know. Whenever we say, but on the better side of that, those of you who are in the dressed in orange and black today, a couple of years ago, Barry Sanders, over a poll on USA Today, by 82% of the vote was voted the most outstanding college football player ever. He was the GOAT at that time. And then the next year, this last year, he was the NFL's best running back. He was the GOAT, the greatest of all times. You know, Jesus, on several different occasions during his ministry, was asked that question. Who is the GOAT? I think he said Barry Sanders, but I'm not certain. I thought that would get a better laugh than that. Actually, it was nothing about football. Football had not been invented yet. He was asked, what is the greatest commandment of all times? What is the greatest commandment of all times? All 4 biographies of Jesus records this question being asked of Jesus. And in the first biography of Jesus that Matthew writes, here's what he says about it. What Jesus replied was, this is the GOAT. This is the greatest commandment of all time. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And then he tags something else with it. He says this, and the second is like this. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And all the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. In other words, they depend on those 2 commandments. The greatest commandment of all times, according to Jesus, is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. And everything else, and everything else hangs just on those 2 commandments. That's the greatest of all time. That's the GOAT. Now, in the 4th biography that is written about Jesus, Apostle John, who has walked with Jesus during his whole ministry, lived the longest of all the apostles. He is on the last night before he is crucified, before he's arrested and crucified, and he has a special dinner. He celebrates Passover with his closest inner circle, the apostles at that time. And so he talks to them. He kind of gives them some important things to remember because he knows he's going to die. They don't like that at all, but they're hanging on every word. And all of a sudden he says this, I'm going to give you a new GOAT. I'm going to give you another greatest of all time. And he says this, John records, says, a new command I give to you. Now, at that point, I've got to tell you, those Jewish boys should have got up and left the room right then, because you didn't write new commands. In Jesus' day, you took God's commands, you might comment on them, you might write essays on them, you might debate them in some way or another, but you did not add a new command. And he says, a new command I give to you. And then he says, this is the command, love one another. And I can just hear Peter or Matthew say, that's not new. To which Jesus would reply, I'm not through yet, guys. Wait on it just a second. He says, a new command I give you, to love one another. And then he says this, just as I have loved you, you should love one another. Would you read that with me? Just as I have loved you, you should love one another. This is an epic moment. This is such a big moment, because Jesus basically says, of the 600 plus commands that are written in the Old Testament, and I'm going to reduce them everything down to 2. And at the end of the day, your marching orders relationally is that you are to treat others as I have treated you. And I bet they could have gone around the room at that time, and Jesus would have said, Matthew, do you remember when I called you? Matthew would go, yep, I was saying in my tax gathering booth. And the other apostle would go, because they just didn't like scumbuckets like tax gatherers at all. And he said, what did I tell you? And he said, you challenged me. You said, come follow me. That's great. And what did we do right after that? And Matthew said, man, we had a party at that time. We celebrated. I mean, and Jesus said, who did we invite? And Peter answered that question. You invited all his scumbucket friends to come to that party. Worst day of my life, having to sit in the same room with those guys. And Jesus would have said, yep, I remember that too, Peter. You were really put out in that whole situation. And here's what I want to remind you of. Peter, did I ever hold that against you, that you had that rotten attitude at that time? But you changed it later on. Did I hold that against you? No, you didn't. Matthew, did I ever say, Matthew, you're the scumbucket prophet? No, you never did call me that at all. And Matthew, I extended grace to you. I extended a kind of mercy to every single person that you brought into the room. And I want you to extend that same grace and that same mercy to every person for the rest of your life. Nathaniel, you remember when we met? And Nathaniel would say, oh yeah, I remember that. Now, remember, Nathaniel, Jesus says, do you remember how you dissed my entire family? Now, this isn't really a famous Bible story, but when Nathaniel heard about Jesus, that he was from Nazareth, his response was, Nazareth? What good thing can come out of Nazareth? I mean, what? There's nobody good that comes out of Nazareth. And Jesus could have said, Nathaniel, remember you dissed my family, you dissed my parents, you dissed my generations that came after me, you dissed my football team, you dissed everything about me. You pretty much made us all sound like complete losers. Do you remember that, Nathaniel? Yeah, I remember that. I'm sorry. And Jesus says, I invited you to follow me. I never brought it up again, did I? And Nathaniel said, no, you never brought it up again. And Jesus could have gone all the way around the room and said, okay, from now on, I want you to think about how I treated you. That's how I want you to treat everybody else. And a few hours later, Jesus would be arrested, and he'd be tried, and he'd be crucified, and that would be, in a few days, an aha moment for all of his disciples. They would never recover when they realized that Jesus gave his life on behalf of them. They'll never recover from that. And it was then that they realized that from that point on, every command that Jesus gave in his life, every command flowed from that one thing. I want you to treat others like I treat you. I want you to understand that you are to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Now the golden rule, you guys have heard the golden rule, right? It's to treat people the way you want to be treated. Jesus upped it. He has the platinum rule, and that's treat others the way God treats you, the way Jesus treated you. Now, this is the kind of overarching principle for everything that I'm going to say today. And I know as I got into this, you guys probably said, I thought we were in a family series and we were going to talk about gifts that men give to their wives. I mean, Steve did such a number on us as women last week. We're ready for the men to kind of get in on this beating also, all right? So here's the deal. The overall principle for everything that we are doing, husbands or wives, especially husbands, is to treat others like Jesus treated us. That to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and in strength, and flowing out of that is I am to treat others the way Jesus has treated me. So after the resurrection, the New Testament writers, especially Paul and Peter that we're going to be talking about this morning, use this overarching principle and begin to ask the question, what does love require of me? What does love require of us? What would this look like in interpersonal relationships? What does this look like in the family? What does this look like in marriages? And whenever you read anything that Paul or Peter wrote in their letters that says, do this, don't do that, do this, you need to remember every one of those commands is linked specifically and directly to Jesus' command to treat others the way I have treated you. They're not making stuff up. They're applying Jesus' brand new command. And this is how it's going to look for ways for Peter and Paul to begin to apply this GOAT principle in marriage. So let's start off this way. What would you say is the most politically incorrect, I can't believe that's in the Bible. Why in the world would they put this in the Bible? Nobody likes that in the Bible statement. Give you a hint. Steve talked about it last week. It's wives. I don't think I'm going to get any cooperation on this one whatsoever. Wives, submit to your husbands, right? I mean, whenever a husband or a man in general brings this up to me, it doesn't happen so much anymore. But I've had guys come up and say, well, doesn't the Bible say that women are supposed to submit to men? And I say to them, how does that verse start anyway? Well, it says women. No, it doesn't say women. It says what? Wives, yeah. Are you a wife? No. Well, then Paul's not talking to you. Paul's not talking to you at all. There are other verses that begin with the word husbands. Probably and likely it would be a good idea for you and I as husbands to follow and focus the verses written to us as husbands. Let your wife focus on the verses that start with the word wife. Now, let's take a look at that verse for just a moment. Steve did such a great job with this last week, but I think it's important for us to grab hold of some things as we go in. And besides, you've eaten a lot since last Sunday, so I want your brain power to start working a little bit, okay? So, and if you're watching online this morning, I want to say I'm glad you're here because I think what we're going to say through the rest of this is so important to our marriages. It's so extremely important of how we live out our lives interpersonally. I think you know that the English Bibles that we have today were the Old Testament was written in Hebrew originally and then translated into other languages like English now or Spanish or whatever. And the New Testament was all written in Greek and then translated in English. English had not been invented yet at the time the Bible was written. And so it was not written in English. And there's some interesting things because there are thousands of, maybe not the originals, but copies of the originals of the Greek text that have been discovered all over the world in the Middle East. Now, if you look at Ephesians 5:22, the original text is this. Can we go to the next slide? Let me see if I've got that up there. I'm sorry, go back. Go back if you would. It says, literally it says, wives yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. It doesn't have the word submit in it. And you say, I knew it. There's something screwy about that verse. No, actually, it's kind of a unique kind of Greek language. Can I give you a little linguistic thing here? Whether you like it or not, I'm going to do it anyway, okay? So in the Greek language, there's some ways that they have of talking or writing that connects things and holds the whole subject of a paragraph together. And the verse before it, while the verb is not in this passage at all, the verse before it, in verse 21, does have that verb. Let's go look at verse 21. Go to the next one. It says, submit to one another out of reverence to Christ. In other words, that is the key statement, and then that verb transfers through the rest of the passage. And if there's not a verb given, you know it's connected to that one statement. So when Paul writes, wives, to your husband, he's connecting that whole idea to submit to each other in the fear or the reverence of Christ. And whenever this was first written, you know, I've got to tell you, the original audience, when they read verse 22, and they said, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, no one went, what? What in the world is he saying? That's the most horrible thing in the world. They didn't say, huh? They said, well, duh. Because everybody in the first century, wives actually legally were property to the husband, especially in Roman culture and Greek culture and the whole Middle East. That's the way it was. And so it wasn't any big surprise that Paul was writing something that was stated something that everyone already knew in the first place. It wasn't a huh, it was a well, duh, you know. This wasn't a big deal because it was common ground. So when Paul writes that, it's like, right, because if we don't, we're going to get arrested. They'll accuse us of some crime and there won't be any witnesses. Eyewitnesses show up on our behalf, you know. But here's the cool thing. So the reason that Paul does this is to remind us the fact that in marriage, in particular in marriage, and then throughout all of our life, is the fact that husbands are to submit to their wives and wives to their husbands. It's mutual submission. It's actually a submission competition within your life. And so one of the ways that we apply this overarching principle of the fact that we are to treat others like Christ treated us is that husbands, you and I are to model and to practice the idea of mutual submission in our marriages with our wives. We are to bring to bear whatever our gifts, our talents are, to leverage those things for the purpose of building up our wives. Whatever burden they have, we are to submit to them also, and we get underneath that burden and help lift it up for them. That means that we've got to have kind of a study of our wives to know what she's like. We need to understand that we are to figure out, and this is almost the toughest assignment that you and I ever have of husbands, is to figure out what makes our wives tick. I know most of the men are afraid to laugh at this point, but it's almost seemingly what do I want to say? Unending project that we are trying to be able to work out, and yet the very thing that really makes marriages hum is, guys, when we practice mutual submission, when we see what their needs are, and we submit willingly to them to leverage those things out for them. That we don't look to ourselves first, but we treat our wives like Christ treats us. And so Paul's second application, this overarching principle, as I have loved you, you're to love other people, is found in verse 25. And when Paul wrote this verse, this is when people in the first century went, no way. Everybody knew that a wife had to submit to her husband, but in verse 25, Paul says this, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. I mean, this is a Christian audience in Ephesus, and when they hear where they hear Paul write, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, they're going, wait just a second. We know how that ended for Jesus, and it did not end well for Christ. He died. We know where this is going. And so the thing is, Jesus died for the church, and Paul still isn't done. He goes on to say this in verse 28. And in the same way, husbands, you should love your wives as your own body. I think it's kind of an interesting thing. Paul is basically saying, if you don't get the theological thing about Jesus and the church, let me make it real simple for you guys. Let me get it down on your level, guys. You're responsible to protect your wife as if she was you. And that was just more than they could imagine. Guys, Paul is applying the principle of Jesus. Treat others the way I have treated you. And you and I are to add dignity. You and I are to add value. And we need to add worth to our spouses. Peter goes on, and he was present the entire time that Jesus was unpacking this value of loving one another just as I have loved you. He also applies it to marriage. As I said, Steve did such a great job last week as he spoke to the wives. And here's what Peter says. Husbands, live with your wife in an understanding way and show her honor as a co-heir of the grace of life. Honoring our wives, guys, is an outflow of treating your wife just like Jesus treats you. It's an unconditional act of showing value to her because God has placed her in your life, not because of what she does. Respect may be earned, but honor is given. Let's be honest. Can we be honest for a moment? How many of you would say that marriage is a challenge at a time? May I see your hands? Okay. Those of you who aren't raising your hand either are not married anymore or you just don't want to participate in the survey. That's okay. But marriage is a challenge. You don't get your way all the time. She wouldn't rub your back. And it's all in knots, and you're ticked off. This is hypothetical, all right? It's not what happened this week or anything else in my household, all right? But it's hypothetical. So you get sullen, and you give her quid pro quo. There's no condition on this statement. Honor your wife. Live with your wife in an understanding way. And so you get sullen when you do that. You are not treating your wife as Jesus has treated you. There's no condition put on this verse. And the challenge is to give her honor even when it is difficult and even when you feel she doesn't deserve it. You have a bit of conflict. That never happens in marriage, does it? You have some conflict, you both get ugly on it, and you start thinking, she doesn't deserve any honor. God's not asking you to condone or support things that she may do that's hurtful or even destructive. But part of how marriage is sustained through commitment and loyalty is by this principle of honor. It means even in the midst of marriage difficulties, you interact with and you treat your wife with respect and in an honorable way because she's co-heir to the grace of God in your life because that's how Jesus treated you. So how do we live this out? Here's some research in the area, all right? Public and private praise. Guys, praising your wife when you're alone, that's great. Praising your wife when you're in public, that's even better. All right? Just giving praise and compliments to your wife and expressing gratitude for what she does are great ways to show honor. And it should be a mix, guys, of specific compliments and recognition of what she does and praising and admiring who she is. When giving praise, it's helpful to try to keep thinking of new things. Guys, I know we can get stuck on one level. Gosh, you are a great cook. Thank you for breakfast this morning. You are such a great cook. Thank you for lunch. You are such a great cook. Thank you for dinner. We can move on to a different subject, all right? If you want to give your wife praise so that she can receive it, you look for ways that you can praise her. Look for ways that in public you can praise her. There's nothing like seeing the countenance on a person's face when someone praises them in public. I've also seen the opposite, when husbands were constantly running down their wives to other people. You get no credit for that. There are subtractions added because of that. This is such a key area You do not realize, I don't think, guys, because we are not very verbal people for the most part, we don't realize how those verbal compliments and praises helps build up the esteem of your wife. And studies have shown that strongly linked, those praises and those specific things are linked to higher marital satisfaction, commitment, and overall happiness for both spouses. Second, listen to her opinion. Ask her about what she reads or is receiving teaching from and what she is learning time. It is so, my wife retired 2 years ago, I guess it is now. And she has been able to focus some of the attention that she focused so much on the classroom to having some significant quiet times and study and listening to different podcasts and things of that nature. One of the things that we've enjoyed so much since she has retired is the sharing of that. My wife is so much smarter than I am. And she has become a person who is great. I know everybody's going to say, well, duh, on that one too, okay? But she has really been digging into the Word and has come out in so many different ways that it's been helpful within our marriage. And when she gives her opinion, when your wife gives her opinion about something, don't immediately demean it or dismiss it. Notice the first word, listen to her opinion. Guys, let's be honest, we have a listening problem. Can I get an amen on that? Yeah, we have a listening problem. Oh, last night Bedlam was on, and my wife wanted to talk. I didn't do so well in this area. You factor in a game or TV or our iPhones, and sometimes, guys, we go completely dark, you know? And our wives want to be heard. They want to know that we are listening. So engage when you're listening. I can hear my wife's words and still remain uninvolved and disconnected. It's an ongoing struggle in my life. Nodding and saying, uh-huh, doesn't cut it. So try this along with your uh-huhs and nods. Restate what she's saying. This kind of forces us to listen and understand and engage. Third way that we can give honor is show interest in her projects or passion. The simple truth is that she probably has projects and passions that do not exactly excite you, right? But you can show her honor by being interested in talking about or listening to what interests her. Studies show that when you do this, it strengthens your appreciation for your wife as well as helping her understand that she is honored. Tell her what she means to you. When was the last time that you told your wife what she means to you and how you love her and what you love about her? You cannot tell her enough how grateful you are for her. Last night I was looking over my notes one last time, and there was something that was very frustrating to me. Something was missing. I believe very strongly in our core value that we've had since day one of our having our core values, and that is strong families make strong communities. The family is the basic unit of all society. Everything flows from it. And when families break down, community breaks down. And since it is a core value, I have strived to work on my role in the family. I want to be a better husband. I want to be a better father, but I often fail. And I'm very thankful that in my failure, Jesus has treated me with respect at times. He sometimes says, "You dummy." And he's right. But I need to grow. And Jesus is very filled with grace. Now, when I fail, I tend to analyze things. And when Tree and I get into conflict, oh, wait a minute. Preachers' marriages never get in conflict, right? We're perfect, conflict-free, right? Wrong. my wife and I are both very strong-willed. And so there's lots of opportunities for conflict within our marriage. And because families are so important to God, for 48 years, I've done a family series every year that I've been preaching. And for 47 of those years, Tria and I have struggled during family series. Just confessing. Steve and I have talked several times down through the years, and I'm sure our wives have also communicated, I know they've communicated this, that the worst month of the year for us as husband and wife and families is during our family emphasis month. Why is that true? Why the struggle? Well, certainly Satan. Absolutely. He is a raging, roaring lion seeking to destroy, devour, and kill. And that is true. And he will do take every opportunity when you are trying to explain principles or things that will build marriage. He will try to tear down whoever's communicating those. But there's another level. And for me, it has to do with expectations. When I was single and I was dating Tria, I never daydreamed about becoming the perfect person for someone else. I mean, I'm kind of like Mary Poppins, I'm practically perfect in every way. I never daydreamed, I can't wait till I become the perfect person for someone else. Now, I did daydream about the perfect person for me. And so when I met Tria, I thought, she is so perfect for me. And I never thought, I can't wait to become the perfect person for her. All I thought about was how that person could become perfect for me. Now, I don't bet, but this is a bet I would take on, that is true in your marriage also. It's all about me, right? It's all about my hopes. It's all about my dreams, my desires. And so as we've talked about gifts that we can give our spouses, and this is at the end of the series, I'd like to tie some things together. We talk about these gifts, and as a husband, I heard what was said last week, and I'm going, that's right. That's what you need to be doing. Expectations. Whenever we communicate those dreams and desires, sometimes to our spouse, those dreams, desires, ideas of how we want to build the perfect family is often built upon what we experienced growing up, whether either to replicate the same thing or redo it into something different. But when we communicate them, they don't come across as dreams and desires. What they come across is expectations. And that's really what's often at the back of our mind. I expect you to act like this. I expect for you to do this for me. I want you to do this for me. Well, aren't I supposed to express those expectations? Expectations, we get to thinking that's what you should be doing. And it creates this burden on our spouse. It creates a burden on the marriage. And the next thing you know, we enter into a debt and debtor relationship within our marriage. You owe me to fulfill this wish, this dream, this ideal for the preferred future that I have. You owe that to me. That's what you should be doing, because we're always thinking about our hopes and our dreams and our desires. And when we think about communicating to our spouses, we just put this burden of debt on that. And so eventually, I don't know about you, but we've communicated those desires back and forth in our marriage all our life. And when the other person does not fulfill that dream or desire, you say, or at least you think in your mind, I do, you owe that to me and you're failing. And so I'm upset. I'm mad. I'm depressed. I get upset. You're not doing what you're supposed to do. And the problem is when this dynamic characterizes the relationship, you cannot recognize love. You can't give love, you can't receive love, because you can't appreciate it and you don't even recognize it. Let me illustrate it this way. If you owe me money, you can't give me money, right? If you owe me $100 and you say, boy, I really liked something you did, I'd like to give you a $50 check. You don't receive it. I don't receive it as a gift. I see it and receive it as a payment. You owe me money. James, I really appreciate what you're doing. I want to give you this. Well, if you owe me more than what you gave me, not only am I not grateful, I don't see it as a gift. And my next question is, where's the rest of it? So consequently, gratitude is minimal, and in a relationship that has become a debtor relationship, the dynamic of that relationship is so much so that you cannot give anything that you think is value. When praise is given, well, you owe that to me. You owe me more. It's never enough. And as long as somebody feels like somebody owes them, they don't receive it as love, and they can't see it as love, and the other person can't even extend it as love. So the question is, how do we keep this from happening? How do we keep legitimate hopes, dreams, and desires from becoming and feeling like expectation? I think the answer is to ask a question. What does she owe me? What does he owe me? What does he owe me? What does she owe me? And sane couples always answer the question the same way. Nothing. That's mutual submission. That's the overall treating someone as Jesus has treated us. Nothing. They don't owe me anything. They know, sane couples know that they owe each other everything, but are owed nothing in return. So what does Tria owe me? Nothing. But I owe her everything. That is goat command living. But when Satan gets in the middle of it and he whispers, she's not doing what she's supposed to do. She owes you. And I fall for it. I just buy Satan's line, hook, line, and sinker. I get upset, I get angry, I get fearful. So how do I handle that? Peter gives us, I think, some very important advice in this whole section, but it's not in chapter 3, it's over in chapter 5. And he said, and we're going to kind of work our way back. Chapter 5, verse 8 says this, I hate this word. You want to say it with me? What's the next word? Be self-controlled. None of us want to be told to be self-controlled. And alert. Why do we need to be alert? Because Satan is on the prowl. He's looking for ways to disrupt, destroy, and disillusion and depress. And he says it. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. And relationships he wants to destroy, especially marriage relationships, especially family relationships. And so he says, beware that your thinking is being influenced by Satan. He wants you to put self first. Satan doesn't want you to think about Jesus' new command. Treat others as I have treated you. Peter says it this way a little bit before that. He says this, all of you clothe yourselves with, can we say the next word? It's really hard to come out of my mouth. Humility towards one another. Why? Because God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. What is the most important ingredient to you having a long-lasting, satisfied marriage? The grace of God. Anybody done some stupid things in their marriage? Yeah, I have too. I've failed big time. What do I need in the midst of those fail times? Slap upside the head sometimes. But more than anything else, I need the grace of God. I need to be so overwhelmed by what he has done in my life that I realize I acted stupidly and I repent. You see, sometimes we think the grace of God means we just go on our merry way. No, it has more to it than that. Grace is the great enablement of God. It helps to wake us up. It helps us to realize that Jesus is in our corner to change our life. Not to change our spouse, but to change our life. And so we need that. We need that. And so he says, this basically means, humility means let others go first. It means going back to the end of the line. It means at every point of decision, at every transition, anytime there's a potential conflict, here's what you're supposed to do. You ask yourself, what would a humble person do? What would a humble person do? So we're going to practice that. Most of you have never asked that question before in your life. What would a humble person do? You say, well, James, I'm not really humble. Well, duh. I think we all knew that. We aren't humble, are we? So that means that's the reason we're asking the question. It's not that you're necessarily going to be humble, but you at least need to know what a humble person does. And so I'd like for all of us to say this out loud because it's a powerful and compelling question, all right? Would you read that with me? All right. What would a humble person do? We need to do that a little more enthusiastically, all right? So let's try it again. What would a humble person do? Now, at this point, I've got lots of husbands staring daggers at me. It's all right, I've had more daggers than you can throw in my life at me. What would a humble person do? Okay, if I was humble, what would a humble person do? Let me give you a little secret about humility. If you start doing what a humble person does, before long you'll become humble. It's amazing. Oh no, you say that's an internal thing. It's not. I mean, you see, you and I, we read our own mind, and we know if we're arrogant. We get some idea of it. But everybody else reads your actions, and actions speak louder than what? Words, that's right. So just say it. What would a humble person do? But if I do that, if I practice that, won't he or won't she take advantage of me? I mean, what do I do? When I know, I fear that they're going to take advantage of me in some way. She'll win the argument. She will look at me with just disdain in her eyes. I mean, how am I going to handle that? How am I going to do that? Well, here's the issue. And this leads us to, I think, one of the very most important verses that's not even said in the context of marriage, but it's so important. I believe that every one of us has struggled with expectations in marriage. And when those expectations aren't met, we get very, very angry. And the conflict just grows and grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. And so what you want to do when your expectations aren't met, we want to go out, we want to write a list for our wife or our husband. All right? You need to do this, you need to do this. If we did this, everything would be better. And we just list it out. Maybe you're not a writer. I am. But I've made plenty of those lists. Fortunately, they've been ignored most of the time. So here's what Jesus says instead of making your list. He says, next verse, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Well, I mean, if I can't tell her about that, I'll just explode inside. No, you won't. You got another outlet. That word cast, it means pick it up and throw it at it. Just throw as hard as you can. Cast all your anxiety on the Lord. You say, well, what does that mean? Jesus says, pray. Okay, our Father, please help my wife be a better person. No, it's not it. All right, our Father, I don't like this conflict. Well, that's a little better, but how about this? How about praying like David does in the Psalms? I can't stand that person. She makes me so mad. I don't think she should do this, and she keeps doing that. Just cast it all out on God. You say, wouldn't God get mad? No, he can take it. And not only that, he can help you sort through it. So cast it out on him. Let me tell you, it is a whole bunch better to cast it to God, cast it to Jesus, than casting it at your wife. You get nowhere in that except to continue to tear down the relationship. God can handle that. And not only that, he can handle you and your spouse. Cast all your anxiety on him because what? He cares for you. Most of our conflicts are marriage. When it comes down to it, I can't tell you how many times in the midst of our conflict, I have said, my wife has said, you just don't care. You just don't love me. It hurts. Cast it all on God because he does care for you. He has treated you so well. And he wants you to treat your wife just like he has treated you. We've been talking about this, And as we cast it to him, when we do that, here's what I found the first remarkable thing that God does. It's not that he puts pressure on my wife, he puts pressure on me. And you may discover that when you're trying to squeeze something out of your wife or squeeze something out of your husband that was never in them in the first place, and they weren't created to give you in the first place, you may discover that you both really hope for and dream of and wish for the very same thing. But that transformation will never happen as long as you are talking to them first instead of to God. The best gift that you can give your spouse this Christmas is really to get down on your knees and pour out those expectations to God instead of to your spouse. So here's the way we're going to close this morning. I'm going to give you that opportunity to cast those things before the Lord. So I'm going to just ask that you would bow your heads. And if you're married right now, I would say that probably there is a frustration in your life right now. This would be a great time to pick that thing up and cast it to the Lord instead of casting it towards your spouse. So we're going to give you some time to do that. Nothing else in church? We can pray. Father, here are the words that are tumbling through our minds right now. I'm thankful for the grace you give us to pour out all of that vileness, all that expectations that cannot be met and are not met to you, and allow you to sort those out. And Father, may your Spirit right now convict us to live out the GOAT principle. Thankful, Father, I'm so thankful for the way you have treated me. I'm thankful that you've gone beyond my vile behavior and died for me. That while I am yet your enemy, you're willing to love me and die on my behalf. Father, as a husband, and there are many husbands and fathers in this room right now, forgive us for pouring out that vileness on our spouse. Forgive us, Father, of raising ourselves up and looking for all the ways that our spouse has not met our needs, instead of looking to you to meet those needs. Father, may grace flow through every relationship in this building and those who are hearing online this morning. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Father, for the way that you have treated us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Let's stand together as we worship him.